Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first webinar of 2019, Everything You Need to Know About the Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology Act. My name is Linda Goff, and I'm the Registrar and CEO of the College of Medical Radiation Technologists of Ontario. And we're here in snowy Toronto. I can't believe it's, middle of April and it's still snowing here. Anyway, we are going to carry on and start this presentation. So very soon our annual report for 2018 will be coming out, and its theme is 5 specialties, 1 profession, ensuring public protection. And so this is very important. As you know, we've had a really busy year in 2018. And now we're continuing on in finalizing the regulation of diagnostic medical sonographers with CMRTO. And I can't get this to advance. There we go. All right. So it was just over a year ago, we had the first sonographers in Canada registered with CMRTO. And that was done at a council meeting. And then the rest of 2018 was spent registering and reviewing applications from sonographers. So we had over 4,400 applications from sonographers that were processed in 2018. And at the end of the year, we had 3,625 sonographers registered and an additional 257 approved for registration. So most of those that were approved for registration are those that are working outside Ontario at this point. So as of December 31st, this is what our numbers look like. So there's our 3,600 sonographers, and they are our second largest specialty. Radiography is still the largest at 4,800. And just over 1,000 radiation therapists, 700 nuclear medicine technologists, and magnetic resonance is our smaller specialty at just under 500. So we now have a total of almost 11,000 members. So big growth happened in 2018. But I wanted to thank the sonographers because you really came through as true professionals. You participated in webinars, you learned and got educated about what regulation meant for you. You got your applications in on time, and you became registered and able to legally practice on January 1. So a huge thank you to you because you made it much easier to process that number by getting your applications in sooner. And you'll remember that this project started back in August of 2017 when we got a letter from the Assistant Deputy Minister, Denise Cole, and she wrote to Wendy Raby, our president, and said that we have direction to regulate sonographers with CMRTO, and that had to happen by January 2018. So we didn't have a lot of time, but it went very well. Our council worked really hard and our staff worked really hard to get everything done. And just a reminder, we can't do anything without ministry approval, without having the legislation to support what it is that we're doing. The road to regulation for sonographers started back in September of 2013 with the Ontario Association of Medical Radiation Sciences submitting an application to the Health Professions Regulatory Advisory Council. And then it's up to the government to decide whether or not to regulate a profession and how to regulate them. So HPRAC, they provide advice to the Minister of Health on the regulation of professions, and they released their report in August of 2015, and they said that sonographers should be regulated with CMRTO, that the protected title should be diagnostic medical sonographer, They wanted to ensure a short transition period because they were concerned about public protection with such a large and important group of professionals providing services to patients without being regulated. And also they said that we should be amending the Medical Radiation Technology Act to include sound waves in the scope of practice, and also the name of the profession needed to be updated. So from HPRAC's recommendations, 3 major ones have already been achieved, and we're just waiting for the final one to be proclaimed in force. The letter from Denise Cole also went on to say why is a government interested in regulating a health profession? And so they said regulating sonographers with CMRTO will bring them under the same regulatory framework as other medical radiation and imaging technologists, so enhancing public protection, and that patients can be assured that their sonographer is subject to ongoing quality assurance and also the college's complaints and discipline mechanisms, because the ministry is always concerned about public protection. But she ended her letter by saying that, they had confidence that CMRTO could achieve this because we've already done this. We did this for MRI technologists. And so they knew that we were familiar with regulating a new specialty. And so the legislative history, this is not the first time we've done this. There's been a lot of legislation evolution, if you like, and also because of our profession and the different modalities we use, we've had to make sure that things are kept up to date with the technology changes. So this started back in 1967, and the Board of Radiological Technicians was established under an act, and it really was a register of radiological technicians and radiation therapists. That's what they were called at that time. And then when the Regulated Health Professions Act came in, CMRTO was established for radiography and radiation therapy based on the membership from the previous BRT register. And for the first time, nuclear medicine technologists were included in the MRT Act. So that was a new specialty back in '93. In 2003, MRI technologists became regulated as our 4th specialty. And in 2011, the MRT Act was amended to include the revised scope of practice statement and additional authorized acts. So that's when the scope of practice was amended to include MRI technologists. So before that, it was being done by regulation, just as it's being done for sonographers at this point in time. And then in 2018, of course, we had sonographers become regulated with CMRTO as our 5th specialty. And so what we're hoping for now is that the new Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology Act will be proclaimed in force. And when this happens, it's already received royal assent. It was passed in 2017. And when this happens, it will repeal and replace the Medical Radiation Technology Act. So what does this act do? Well, first of all, it improves transparency to the public by changing the name of CMRTO to the College of Medical Radiation and Imaging Technologists of Ontario, or CMRITO, and also changes the name of the profession to Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology to better reflect all 5 specialties providing medical radiation and imaging services to patients in Ontario. So this is important not only for transparency to the public, but also for the sonographers, because of course sonographers are not using ionizing radiation or any form of radiation. And so there was concern by the profession for many years, because CMRTO, although it was a good match for sonographers to join CMRTO, the name of the college and the name of the profession didn't reflect what it was that sonographers are doing. So we're hoping that in 2019, the MRIT Act will be proclaimed. And if you go to the Ontario e-laws website that lists all the legislation that's in effect in Ontario, you can see right now there's 2 acts for our college. We've got the MRIT Act, which is not proclaimed in force yet, and we have the Medical Radiation Technology Act. And of course, when the MRIT Act is proclaimed in force, then the MRT Act will disappear and we'll just have the 1 act. So how are we regulating sonographers now without the MRIT Act being in force? Well, we needed 3 regulations to make this happen. And the reason it's easier for regulations to happen is because they can be approved by cabinet, whereas legislation has to be approved by the entire legislature. So often government will look and see what they can do through regulation. So we had the registration regulation under the MRT Act. We had the prescribed forms of energy regulation for the scope of practice under the MRT Act, and we'll talk about that in more detail later on. And we had the controlled acts regulation under the RHPA. And so all 3 regulations were approved by cabinet and were filed on December 20th, 2017. Another thing to keep in mind is every single part of the regulations and proposed legislation are always open for public consultation. So there's been lots of debate on this. HPRAC did a lot of public consultation as well. So we've come through a considerable time of public consultation and thoughts that have been provided to the government. So the timing of the 3 regulations was critical. So the registration regulation came into force on January 1, along with the scope of practice amendment, and the controlled acts regulation came into force on January 1, 2019. So that's the more recent one. So 2018 was a year of transition for us. We had the legal authority to regulate sonographers, and sonographers were able to become registered with CMRTO, but it wasn't mandatory at that point. We started with our 1-year grandparenting period for registration. We revised our standards of practice and our code of ethics to include our 5th specialty, and also our revised quality assurance program came into effect because our QA program is based on our standards of practice. So here's all the documents, and they were all sent out on January 1, 2018 to all our current members and made available on our website. And then the regulation of sonographers was completed on January 1st, 2019. And that was the date that amendments to the Controlled Acts regulation made under the Regulated Health Professions Act came into force. And what that did was it said only members of CMRTO or the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, College of Midwives of Ontario, and the College of Nurses of Ontario are authorized to apply sound waves for diagnostic ultrasound. And so, of course, midwives and nurses, there's some restrictions on the situations in which they are able to apply sound waves. So that was the part that really started to regulate the application of sound waves and made it mandatory for sonographers to be registered with CMRTO in order to be legally authorized to practice. So in the meantime, we've been getting ready also for the Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology Act to come into force. So our staff and our council have been working hard on getting ready for this. We developed a new visual identity to reflect the college's new name that represents the full membership. We've been busy building a new website, and also we are busy developing new publications, but also updating old publications and templates and all those things to reflect the college's new identity. So This is because the College of Medical Radiation Technologists of Ontario will no longer exist when the MRIT Act comes into force. So other things that we've been doing, we've updated our bylaws, we've revised our council composition and electoral districts. We're currently working on updating the registration regulation. We've got the new logo, new website we'll be looking at, and then of course all these other things are going on. The good news is that we don't have to do it all in one day, because the legislation says that the bylaws, regulations, and processes continue in force until revoked and replaced under the MRIT Act. So that's good, because it's a lot of work anyway, but it would be impossible to do it all on one day. So in June of 2018, Council approved our new logo for the CMRTO. So there it is. It's an updated version of our past logo. And so Council worked very hard on that with our art director, because they were looking for something that was kind of an evolution rather than a revolution, because CMRTO is still here. It's just we have another 4,000 members and a new specialty now. And so we wanted to update it to reflect that. So we have 5 specialties, 1 profession. And so here's our logo with our new name in English and also in French. So once we get the MRIT Act proclaimed in force, we're ready to start using our new logo right away. So I hope you like it. Council spent a lot of time on it. Of course, the old logo, lots of people didn't realize it was a caring hand holding a radiant energy. And so with the updated version, I think it's more apparent. So we're really excited about this and ready to start using our new logo and our new name as soon as possible. We were hoping for January 1, but that didn't happen. So the MRIT Act, of course, changes the name of the college. We've already talked about that. And also it changes the name of the profession. So the profession changes from medical radiation technology to medical radiation and imaging technology. It also changes the name of the professionals. So we'll be changing from medical radiation technologist to medical radiation and imaging technologist. Now, our council considered this when they were looking at the standards of practice back in 2017. And so rather than calling, because you'll remember the standards of practice says MRTs must do this and MRTs must do that, and lists all the standards that you follow every day in your practice. And so they didn't want to use medical radiation and imaging technologies because it gets to be a mouthful. And so council, we consulted on it back in November of 2017, and you'll notice that the updated standards of practice now refers to CMRTO members rather than MRTs. So more generic and a little bit easier to say. Now, of course, the name of the profession and the name of the members doesn't replace the specialty titles and abbreviations. Those are set out in the registration regulation. And so it's proposed, we'll look at this again later on, but these are the abbreviations and the specialty titles that our members use every single day in your practice. And of course, that's specialty specific. So you can think of medical radiation imaging technologists as kind of the generic name for all of our members. And then, of course, we've got the 5 specialty certificates and the 5 specialty titles underneath that. And that's what most of our members call themselves on a day-to-day basis. So the other thing that I thought you might be interested in knowing about, because, of course, the name is a big issue, and everybody has all kinds of ideas of how to change the name. But there's lots of complexity to it. And I wanted to let you know that the Alliance of Medical Radiation and Imaging Technologists Regulators of Canada, so we have a group of regulators from all the different provinces where MRTs and sonographers are regulated, and we have one alliance where we meet and talk about all these regulatory issues. So up until March, they were known as the Alliance of Medical Radiation Technologists Regulators of Canada. And so because sonographers are now being regulated in a number of different provinces, the Alliance looked at that and said, you know what, we need to make sure we're reflecting sonographers too. And so at the national level, the decision was made to use the same terminology that's being used in the Medical Radiation and Imaging Technology Act. So there's consistency across the country. And I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. So Quebec has a different approach to names. They tend to add on names, and then you end up with a very lengthy name for all their different specialties. And of course, they also have electroneurophysiology. And but there's their acronym. It's 10 letters long. So everybody just calls them the Quebec College because it's much easier to say. But I just wanted to let you know that our name of our profession and the name of our college is what's being used at the national level as medical radiation technologists and diagnostic medical sonographers become regulated together in multiple jurisdictions. The scope of practice statement. So the scope of practice statement is, of course, set out in the MRT Act. And in the MRIT Act, it changes, and it changes to the practice of medical radiation and imaging technology is the use of ionizing radiation, electromagnetism, sound waves, and other prescribed forms of energy for the purposes of diagnostic and therapeutic procedures, the evaluation of images and data relating to the procedures, and the assessment of the individual before, during, and after the procedures. So how that's happening now is under the MRT Act, it doesn't appear like that. There's that regulation. And so if you go to the MRT Act, there's a regulation that says that diagnostic ultrasound is a form of energy under the scope of practice statement. So that's not clear and transparent. So we hope that gets fixed. Under the MRT Act, the CMRTO continues. So there's a provision that says that the CMRTO is continued under the name of the College of Medical Radiation and Imaging Technologists. So this is important. So our bank account changes, all our agreements change, our lease changes, all those things. So this is important from a business perspective. And of course, this is what happened when the BRT became the CMRTO way back in '93. Council members continue on. So anyone who is a council member or the president or vice president under the MRT Act will continue on under the MRIT Act. So all our council members, their terms continue on as usual, and our president and vice president will continue on, presuming hopefully that the MRIT Act is proclaimed in force before June. So important, this is a very important one for transition from members. So it says under the MRIT Act that a member under the MRT Act shall continues with the same certificate of registration issued under the MRT Act. So question that many of our members have been asking, what do I have to do to transfer my registration to the CMRTO? You have to do nothing. We'll do it all automatically when the public register comes up under our new website. So that's a good thing. More questions. What do I need to do if my application's been approved and I'm not registered yet? Or I've submitted my application and I don't have a decision yet? Or I'm currently in my educational program and I haven't written my exam yet? Nothing different. everything will continue on. So we'll give you new forms when they're appropriate, but at this point in time, nobody has to do anything different, and everything will continue on smoothly and seamlessly. Bylaws and regulations, they will also continue on under the new Act. And so we have 3 regulations: the professional misconduct regulation, our advertising and QA regulation, and there's just one regulation that's impacted by the MRIT Act, and that's the registration regulation. So that's why we have it there now for consultation. So the process to approve regulations is kind of lengthy. First, the proposed regulation has to be approved by council for consultation, and then it's open for consultation to members and the public. The council will review those comments and make any amendments, and if it's appropriate, they then approve the regulation and it gets submitted to the government, and then we wait for the government to review and amend and approve, and then finally it comes into effect. Those regulations can take lengthy time, 6 months up to a couple of years to come into effect. So nothing's happening urgently at this point. So our proposed registration regulation is up on our website under the consultation section, and the consultation closes on June 2nd. In this section of the website, there's a summary of the proposed regulation that's written in English, so it's easy for everybody to understand, a 4-page summary of what the changes are. And also, you can actually see the new proposed regulation and the track changes version, so as compared to our current registration regulation. So what changes? There's a lot of updates, and really that's all this is updating. So our current regulation and has our old terminology. The new regulation has the new terminology for the profession and also for the professionals. Conditions on registration. So as you know, every member shall within every 5-year period engage in competent practice as a medical radiation and imaging technologist in at least one of the specialties in which the member holds a certificate of registration. And you provide us with evidence of doing that every year when you renew your registration and you declare, yes, I'm engaged in competent practice. And of course, that does not have to be clinical practice, but now we've updated it to include imaging. The other condition is that the member shall practice only in the areas of medical radiation and imaging technology in which the member is educated and experienced. And so I know this is something for sonographers because, of course, our current regulation says medical radiation technology. So this will be all-encompassing for everyone. Other administrative cleanups. So we are combining all the registration requirements for applicants into one section for all 5 specialties, and but the requirements stay the same. So basically everybody has to complete an approved educational program, an approved certification exam, and all that has to happen within a 5-year period of graduation or last practice. So it's all combining into one section. We've also removed the list of approved educational programs. So the requirement for the programs to be accredited stays the same. And then we'll be managing that by council policy rather than having them listed in the regulation. And we're removing sections that are no longer in effect. So grandparenting for both MR and diagnostic medical sonography. So this brings up another question. So you might be saying, well, I was grandparented into CMRTO as a sonographer or as an MRI technologist, and does that now mean that I need to complete an approved examination or educational program? So of course, no, not at all. All current specialty certificates of registration continue under the MRIT Act and the new registration regulations. So you only have to apply once, okay? And then, of course, we've got our specialty titles and abbreviations. So not a lot of changes here. And the reason is that for transparency, we want to make sure everybody knows who everybody is. And it's hard to change titles once they've been established. Some of you will remember how hard it was and how long it took for us to get the periods out of the MRTTs and the MRTNs. So the only change that has happened here is that diagnostic medical sonographer is now on its own and is no longer linked with medical radiation technologist. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Our current regulation, sonographers can use MRT DMS or DMS on its own. So again, not a lot of change here, just a variation there. And here's how you're going to use your multiple specialties. So both Caroline and Annette have multiple specialties. And so there you can see how they appear. So the next steps for the registration regulation is for Council to review the comments that members and the public are currently making on our website. And if appropriate, they will approve the regulation for submission to the government at their June 14th meeting. So that's where we're up to with that. Other changes that have happened, Bylaws 60, as you know, was approved by Council in September of last year. And what this did, this was in preparation for the MRIT Act. It streamlined all our previous bylaws into a single comprehensive bylaw. Again, we had consultations over the summer. And the biggest change was the composition to the CMRTO Council and the electoral districts, because we needed to make sure that we had sonography as a district. So Council reviewed how things have been working over the last little while, and there's been a move towards more equal representation of public and professional members on councils. And so we also looked at Bylaw 12 that set out all the previous electoral districts. So the new districts that came into effect on October 1st, there are 5 specialty districts: radiography, radiation therapy, nuclear medicine, MR, and diagnostic medical sonography. There's a new member-at-large district, and the faculty member has now become the academic member. So what happened was the 4 districts that were used before for radiography, because it was our largest district, that has now been rolled into 1 district. And so our radiography northern, central, and western districts are going to be ending. So this is the end of the terms for Natalie and Janet Shearer as of June this year. And then the central district that Ebenezer is in will end in June of 2020. And of course, we've had our election. They were held in the MR, sonography, and the member-at-large districts this year. The polls closed last week, and next week at the end of the recount period, we'll be announcing who are the elected councillors in diagnostic medical sonography and our member-at-large, our 2 new districts. So effective June 2020, our council composition will be 7 public members, 7 members of the profession, and of which there will be 5 specialty districts, the 1 member-at-large, and those are both elected. And the other change that council made is to change the faculty member that was elected into an appointed academic counselor. And we accepted applications for that last month too. So our next steps, what's happening with the MRIT Act and the registration regulation? Well, we're waiting for the government to proclaim the MRIT Act in force. And we will submit the approved proposed registration regulation to the government when council has approved it. We are getting ready to update the public register, update all our programs, standards, guidelines, publications, forms, and all that kind of stuff, and release a new website. And here's what the new website looks like. It's so much easier to navigate. It's using new technology, and we're very anxious to get it out there because we think it's going to be much easier for the public and also for our members to navigate. Not as many layers. You'll be happy to hear that. And it looks very attractive too. So that's what we're working on, and we're all ready to release the MRIT Act as soon as the government proclaims it in force. So that brings us to the end of today's webinar. You will be able to see it on our website within 24 hours. And it's in the video section, which you can find under resources. Thank you all for your attention, and make sure that you let your colleagues know that it will be available on the website, and then they can review it at their leisure, like a rainy Saturday morning, which is supposed to happen tomorrow. So you take care, and we'll see you all again sometime.